Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Good to see you guys. I hope you're doing well on this Saturday. Today I want to take a moment to discuss the what the ideal coworker is for an INFJ. You know, and you can look at this through different lenses depending on the position that the coworker has. But if you imagine yourself to be an INFJ in a company, say, or in an organization of some sort, what profile would your coworkers ideally have for you to be fulfilled in your position, for you to be energized, to feel valued, to feel rewarded? These thoughts have also been stimulated by the fact I started the job recently, so I have also been thinking on this topic. So I want to offer you some tidbits on this front. So if you're interested, stick around. You know that I have written a book on the INFJ type, the Ecstatic Soul, which is this book, and which you can get at the links below. It's the reference book on the INFJ currently available. There'll be a sequel coming out very soon, so stay in touch with more updates on that front. I also have written a novel a couple of years ago, The Infinite Castle, and the rumor has it the main character is an INFJ. So if you're interested, have a look at the links below, and you can also support me in this way. So, and if you're into Kafka, Dostoevsky, and so on, this might be just your bag. There's also a link to Patreon that always helps massively. So thank you to my supporters. And if you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Okay, so co-workers. Well, first of all, if I appear a little bit tired today, I may or may not appear a bit tired, but if I do, it's the first week of work, and I hadn't been actually in a job, formally speaking, in an office for a while. So it has been it has felt like a long and busy week. And this is the French system, which is quite formal and formalized. The idea that French society is ISFP or something is a cliche that doesn't bear out in reality. And in this system, particularly in the public system, because I work for a university now, in the first 6 months that you start work, you're not allowed any days of remote work. So after 6 months, I'll be allowed at 1 or 2 days. So I look forward to that. But anyway, this is beside the point. I've been reflecting on what is the ideal coworker for an INFJ. This is an interesting question, right? And it's an interesting question also because it can allow us to dispel some, I think, all too easy interpretations. I think that an easy interpretation would be that an ideal, the more a type is similar to an INFJ, the more ideal, right? So let's start by considering NI leads, right? So we have the INFJ, of course. So your coworker is an INFJ, and you have the INTJ. Your coworker is an INTJ. Okay. So between the two, first of all, which one is more ideal? Well, I think the more ideal one is the INFJ. Right. So INFJs working with INFJs are probably going to, on average, of course, there are many factors that expand way beyond the purview of type that may pitch the balance differently. But if we were just abstracted from all of that, I think that INFJs are probably more likely to work seamlessly with other INFJs than they are with INTJs. Partly because, of course, like sharing of NI is same in both cases, but obviously you have FETI on one hand interacting with FETI and FIT interacting with FETI. And the fact of the matter is that it's just not easy on average for an FIT axis to work with an FETI axis. That can be compensated for by a highly developed, maybe lead JE function, whether it be FE or TE, particularly TE. But FE and TE leads can work together in the name of some sense of pragmatism that, if you like, trumps the difference in judging axis. But when you're not leading with a JE function, when you're leading with NI, you're going to experience the conflict between FE and TE more starkly. But that being said, that doesn't mean, that just because INFJs are more likely to work seamlessly together than they are with INTJs, that doesn't mean that they will necessarily work well together. And here, the distinction that I would like to introduce as a second step is between co-workers that you have around you, but are not necessarily in your same chain of responsibility. In other words, if an INFJ is in your office and you collaborate with them on occasion, you interact with them on a daily basis, but they're not your line manager, or you are not their line manager. This kind of INFJ personality in an office, for you, it's very good. It's very good because you're going to be able to relate to someone. You're going to have a lot of the same experiences as you. And given their functional makeup, so they're going to have similar experiences to you. But that's really, really useful because, obviously when you start a job, even when you're past the start, but you experience some difficulties in the job, including difficulties with other colleagues or complications relating to a particular kind of mission that you have or task that you don't really find all that stimulating, or particular views that you don't think make a lot of sense, that you conflict with, having another INFJ is going to be very, very helpful, because you're going to be able to relate. And by the way, I want to use this opportunity to emphasize that in those cases, when we're talking about these other colleagues that are not directly involved in the line of responsibility, right, when it comes to managing, INTJs, being NI leads, are also going to be very good to have around. Not as good as INFJs, but good to have around. Because by the fact that their dominant is NI, they'll have a lot in common with you. And you'll be able to create sometimes what I call an island of spirit in my new book, or at least an ersatz island of spirit that will promote a sense of solidarity and mutual understanding within this larger structure that might not in always be satisfying to you. So for that, I think, having an INFJ colleague that is like that, or an INTJ colleague that is like that, is going to be very good. But it's different. It's quite different when we shift the question to the direct line of command or the line of management. Having an INTJ manager or being the manager of an INTJ, I think on average, not saying in all cases, on average, it's not going to be as good as having an INFJ manager or managed per staff. But I still don't think that's the best scenario. It's not a very good scenario in my experience, and I think the reason why it's not going to be a very good scenario is because when you're in this line of management, you have to, if you like, provide a blueprint of a sense of direction of where you want to go. And we know that being an I lead tends to come with a certain tunnel vision where you want to go. This is characteristic of NI leads. It explains why NI leads can stick to a path consistently and achieve results. But it also means that there's often going to be a lack of flexibility around the vision itself, the sense of direction itself, the ways to implement it, what is to be done, and what is to be ultimately arrived at. So things will work fine on the condition that your manager and yourself, let's say both NI leads, both INFJ, things might work very well if you happen to have the same sense of direction in mind. But nothing guarantees it. Because being an I lead and someone else being an I lead, what it guarantees is that there will be a similar form to how you conduct, yourself toward this sense of vision, the sense of how things ought to be organized towards, long-term view. But it doesn't mean that the long-term view will be the same, and that will be dependent on many other factors, right? It will be dependent on many other things about you that sort of define your vision, your view, your long-term view. If the two conflict, so if you like, you have the same form of tunnel vision, but the content of the vision is not easy to reconcile. So you get a clash because there's not an easy opening towards a converging reconciliation between two tunnel visions. In a sense, they are apart because they are partitioned, right? So you need, a tunnel has walls, right? So it's hard to, and now of course the idea is not necessarily that a manager ought to aim for complete reconciliation with someone they're managing. They're meant to, to be directing things more so, but of course things work better if, and ought to be done in such a way that the two parties agree on this sense of direction. It's hard to reconcile if there's no real openness to compromise here, or to a fusion of horizons, to borrow from Gadamer. So what happens in practice, I think, is that when you're dealing with, if you're an NI lead and you're dealing with, you're in a relationship of management, it's been my experience, and I don't have as yet a fully fledged theory about this. So far I can only really share with you experiences that I have to some extent brought together into a story rather than a theory. I think working with any leads as manager or as managee often works better. And works better because the any lead is going to, of course there's other conditions, well-developed TI or well-developed FI. Again, because TI-FE is more aligned, I think an ENTP probably works better than the NFP, but still, things can work well in both cases. The flexibility of the any lead, their ability to really take an interest in what your view is and aim towards an integration, their lack of dogmatism, if you like, about where things are supposed to go, is going to be much more easily integrating you. And similarly, if they're being managed by you, they will have this adaptability as well, and understanding where you're coming from, where you want to go, and what they can bring. And there's really an opportunity here for mutually reinforcing each other. They and their any for the flexibility, you for the, the consistency of long-term view. If that works together, it can work very well for both parties. It can be satisfying for both parties. Now, when you're talking about having a colleague who is an any lead, as opposed to, being in a line, in direction of line management, in a relationship of line management, again, it's different, because you won't be able to relate to them the same way that you will relate to an INFJ or an INTJ, right? So, for example, if you experience difficulties at work, you're frustrated, for example, with your line manager, and the way the structure is built and runs and where it's heading, again, like the other NI lead will offer a sphere for relating that is quite significant. Whereas the any lead might, because of their intrinsic tendency to flexibility, they might not completely understand. They might say, sure, I see what you mean, but I have other ways to make things work. So the flexibility here doesn't work in the favor of the relatedness that you'd have with a colleague outside the chain of responsibility. So I think chain of responsibility, working with an any lead, is actually going to be on average more satisfying to you. In terms of colleagues that are not directly involved in this, may collaborate with you, may exchange with you, but there's no line of responsibility in management. I think that, the NI lead is going to be more suited on average. Now that leaves aside the question, of course, of many other leads. We've not talked about SI, we've not talked about TI, we've not talked about FI, we've not talked about SE, and we've not talked about JE. I think that there's lots more to tell here, but this will have to be done in 2 parts because this video is already running 15 minutes. So the first thing I want to say is that, so that it's just full disclosure, I will continue arguing and maintaining that NE leads are the best suited for being in a relation of responsibility and management, and that NI leads are ahead of the game when it comes to colleagues that are not directly involved in that line. So you have NI and NE in different position, and they're top of the game, ideal. And in this respect, this is answering the questions of the video. But I still think it would be very interesting to drill down into these other types, the TIs, the FIs, the FEs, the TEs, the SIs, the SEs. Where do they stand in this? Is SI necessarily going to be awful to work with in all scenarios, line management or not? Is SE going to be, how does SE relate to NE in this respect? What's the whole FE and TE situation, right? So we want to get more vision. What about FI and so on? But, maybe we'll continue the discussion tomorrow, okay? So stick around if you're interested. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.